I recently had a chance to visit Portugal for the first time, and I wanted to share my trip with y'all. I used to be a tour guide in New York City, and since then, I've made it my mission to share Black and African history in every country that I visit. In the United States, there has been a concerted effort to hide African and Black history. So it's my goal to always share this information from wherever I visit so it contributes to these archives that must be conserved. I visited two places in Portugal, Porto, which you see in the video here, and Lisbon. What's really interesting is that Portugal started the transatlantic slave trade, but we don't hear them being talked about as much as England and France. Inside the country, there's little acknowledgement of the pivotal role that Portugal played in the slave trade. There was supposed to be a memorial erected to honor the enslaved, but it seems that the leaders in Lisbon have delayed the memorial project for years. Here you see scenes of Porto, which is the Portuguese city known for its sweet port wine. There were some Black people we saw while walking around Porto, but not as much or not as many as we saw in Lisbon. When I was researching the history for this video, I read about the interesting history between Ethiopia and Portugal. Apparently, the Portuguese helped, and I'm using air quotes when I say this, but they helped the Ethiopians fight against their adversaries in war. But I actually think that the Portuguese wanted to gain control of the Red Sea, which bordered Ethiopia until 1993 when Eritrea gained their independence from Ethiopia. Eritrea borders the Red Sea now, and Ethiopia is landlocked. While in Portugal, it was particularly important for me to learn about the country's dark colonial history. Aside from the fact that we all learned about the Portuguese explorer, and I'm using air quotes again here, Christopher Columbus, I remember singing in grade school Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. But my parents' home country of Cameroon was named by the Portuguese after they landed in Cameroon and discovered a river of prawns and gave Cameroon its name. I had the awesome privilege of being able to do a walking tour with the incomparable Naky, who is a Portugal native originally from the West African country of Togo. Here you see Naky, and he hosts these 4-hour walking tours in Lisbon and took us through so much African history. What was really unique about the tour was that it wasn't whitewashed and focused on the Africans who were taken from their lands and the other implications of enslavement on the Afro Portuguese. Naky took us through so many sites in Lisbon and explained the significance of each place. A few important things I learned on the tour. The Portuguese trafficked more people than any other country at an estimated 6 million people. Portugal, like France, doesn't allow the collection of race or ethnic data, so the country doesn't have an exact estimate of the number of Black people inside the country. Inside Lisbon, Lagos de São Domingos is an important place for the Black community, and Lisbon became the center of slavery in Portugal. Here, he took us to a Black owned bar. I believe it's owned by an Afro Brazilian. It's called Lisbon Bar. Definitely recommend you checking it out if you are in Lisbon. Here is a clip of some of the questions that Naky was answering for us about Portuguese history and Black folks in Portugal.
Okay? Like it's not like the American level. No, not at all. But the thing is, parents who can pay the scholarship to their kids are the one who face this problem from the 80s, who cannot create like a generational wealth. And they are doing the same work, being in cleaning cleaning services, being security work, being in construction. These are the same parents. How much are they earning that can allow them to save money for the family first, and money for the kids, for the education, and pay maybe even like the half of the scholarship. Yeah? So this is the problem. So you have generation of children who were not Portuguese. So when you're not Portuguese, you're gonna have like a full scholarship. So if you are not Portuguese, you may have half or not, or nothing. Where will you find the rest of it? When you are paid now 750 euros a month, the last place where they abolished slavery was Brazil. So Portuguese Roman colony, 1888. For 1888, since slavery stopped in many places, Europeans were always thinking about the African continent. That is the continent of resources.
In Africa, Portugal colonized Angola, Mozambique, Guinea-Bissau, Cape Verde, and Sao Tome and Principe. Angola was particularly of interest for the Portuguese because the country was rich in diamonds. Angola was also the last country to gain its independence from Portugal. One thing Naky explained in detail to us is how the church doctrine, and particularly the Catholic Church doctrine, was used as a tool to defend enslavement and seize lands from indigenous people. There was a persistent theme of Africans being labeled as subhuman and therefore undeserving of rights, dignity, or respect. We had such an interesting conversation about religion. Africans were not largely practicing Christianity prior to the transatlantic slave trade, except in small parts of Africa like Ethiopia, where there were Christians. Prior to colonization, many Africans were practicing African spirituality. And for my honeymoon, when we went to Egypt, I learned about the sect of Coptic Christians that are currently in Egypt, but they are a very small minority of the population. One thing I didn't know that I learned from Naki was that before Ethiopians were practicing Christianity, they had other spirituality practices that they were engaging in. In 2019, archaeologists found 158 individual skeletons determined to be enslaved Africans that dated back to the 15th and 17th centuries. It's wild that, given how deep Portugal's involvement in the slave trade was, there are few monuments or memorials to acknowledge this inside the country. Portugal claims to be one of the first countries to abolish slavery, but slave traders instead continued to traffic slaves in Portugal's colony of Brazil. We met tons of black folks in Portugal, with many of them being from Angola, Guinea Bissau, Mozambique, and Brazil. There are many folks within the African diaspora that have decided to move to Portugal, but the country is not without its issues. Systemic racism shows up in many forms in the country, including the types of jobs that people hold. Many Africans in the country are kept out of jobs that are considered more prestigious and are often in more lower wage jobs within the country. Many Afro Portuguese are not given Portuguese citizenship and are not necessarily considered or recognized as Portuguese citizens. We had a chance to enjoy the food at this black owned restaurant. The food was amazing. It was called Mambo, so I highly recommend if you have a chance to visit. I had a chance to try the Angolan meat for the first time, and it was really good. I hope you enjoyed this very brief history of Portugal that I learned on my trip. If you're visiting Lisbon, I highly recommend the Africa Lisbon tour hosted by Naky. I also think it's really important that whenever you visit these colonizer countries, you learn about the African and indigenous histories within the country. Many of these countries are not willing to share the real history with tourists and outsiders or even their own citizens. It's important that this knowledge continues to be shared. Perhaps the saying is true, and not learning about our history means that we are doomed to repeat it.